"Don't move! You black thug!" Detective John Ramirez snarled, his voice thick with contempt as he lunged forward and seized Marcus Thompson by the collar. In one brutal motion, Ramirez slammed Marcus face first onto the gravel path, driving a knee hard into his back while wrenching his arms behind him. The sharp stones cut into Marcus's cheek, blood mixing with dirt, the cold steel cuffs snapping tight enough to draw fresh pain from old scars. Humiliation flooded through him, deeper than the physical hurt, as distant park visitors turned away, unwilling to witness the injustice in that single act of unchecked power. Ramirez had no idea he had just ignited the fuse that would burn down his entire career. His badge, his freedom, everything he had protected with lies for decades. Before we continue this powerful story of justice, delayed, but never denied, tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments if this story moves you. Please subscribe and like the video. It helps more people find stories that matter. Now, let's continue. Marcus Thompson had come to Griffith Park that evening for quiet. The corruption trial files needed one final review before Monday's opening statements, and the open air helped him think clearly. He sat on the familiar wooden bench, papers neatly arranged, a thermos of coffee beside him. At 45, he carried himself with the calm authority of a federal judge. Yet beneath the tailored suit beat the heart of a survivor. His fingers brushed the scar on his left temple again, an unconscious ritual whenever memories surfaced. 15 years had dulled the physical mark, but not the recollection of fists, boots, and shouted slurs. He breathed slowly, pushing the past down. Focus on the case, he told himself. Focus on the evidence. The sound of approaching engines broke his concentration. 3 Los Angeles Police Department patrol SUVs stopped abruptly on the service road. Doors opened in unison. Detective John Ramirez stepped out first, his silhouette unmistakable even in the dimming light. 50 years old now, heavier than before, but the same deliberate stride, the same cold confidence. Sergeant Elena Brooks followed, her face set in professional neutrality. 2 younger officers trailed behind, alert but silent. Ramirez scanned the park with practiced suspicion. His eyes landed on Marcus, alone, well-dressed, black. That was enough. "Good evening," Ramirez said, the words polite but the tone sharp. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here by yourself?" Marcus closed the file folder slowly. He met the detective's gaze without flinching. "Reviewing case documents. Officer, perfectly legal." Ramirez moved closer, boots crunching on gravel. He leaned over the bench. "Invading space. Case documents? In a park after dark? Looks suspicious to me." He snatched a page from the stack. Legal citations, docket numbers, notes on evidence tampering, nothing incriminating. Yet Ramirez twisted it. "We get a lot of dealers using places like this to plan drops." Marcus kept his voice even. "I assure you, these are federal court files." Brooks stepped forward. "Let's see some ID." Marcus reached carefully into his inner jacket pocket. Ramirez intercepted the wallet, flipping it open with deliberate slowness. The judicial identification card stared back, official seal gleaming. Ramirez's lip curled. "Nice try. Fake judge cards are common these days. You'd be surprised how good the forgeries are getting." The dismissal stung, but Marcus remained composed. His thumb, hidden in his pocket, pressed record on his phone. Every word from this moment forward would be captured. Ramirez began a rough pat-down. His hands moved with practiced speed. In a fraction of a second, too quick for the younger officers to notice, he slipped a small plastic bag of white powder into Marcus's inner pocket. Then, feigning discovery, he pulled it out triumphantly. Well, what do we have here? Possession of a controlled substance. You're under arrest." Marcus felt the trap close. Anger rose, but he forced it down. That was not there before. Brooks glanced at the bag, then at Marcus. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Gone as quickly as it came, she had covered for Ramirez before. Loyalty to the badge, she told herself. Protection of the team, hands behind your back, Ramirez ordered. The cuffs clicked shut, metal bit into wrists. Marcus winced, but did not cry out. Blood trickled from the scrape on his cheek. The humiliation burned. Yet beneath it burned something stronger. Resolve. Ramirez gripped his arm hard. You picked the wrong night to play lawyer. Marcus looked him straight in the eye. And you picked the wrong man to frame. Detective Ramirez. The use of his name made Ramirez pause. How do you know my name? Marcus offered a faint, calm smile. I know a great deal about you. More than you realize. Brooks radioed dispatch. Unit 7, Adam 12. One adult male in custody. Possession. Transporting to Rampart. In the back of the SUV. Marcus sat upright despite the discomfort. Ramirez drove. The rearview mirror reflected his uneasy glances. Something about the prisoner's calm unnerved him. At the station. Processing began. Fingerprints taken. Mugshot. The digital scanner connected to federal databases. A red flag appeared almost immediately, but the night shift clerk missed it at first. Ramirez filled out the arrest report with practiced efficiency, planted evidence described as discovered during routine search. He signed with a flourish. Elena Brooks watched from across the room. Her son was waiting at home with a sitter. She thought of the overtime pay, the mortgage, the years invested in the department. Covering for partners had always felt necessary. Tonight, it felt heavier. Lisa Wong, working late in internal affairs, saw the federal alert flash on her screen. Honorable Marcus A. Thompson, United States District Judge. Her heart skipped. She picked up the phone. Marcus sat in the holding cell. The door clanged shut. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He closed his eyes. Thought of his daughter Sarah waiting at home. Worried because he was late, he whispered to himself, Hold on. Baby girl, Daddy's coming home. Ramirez stepped outside for air. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. An old feeling crept in. The same one he had buried after the beating 15 years ago. Guilt, mixed with fear. He had no idea the system he had manipulated for so long was now turning against him. The judge he had just arrested would soon sit in judgment over him. The night deepened. Evidence gathered silently. Truth waited patiently. From the bench to the bench. A judge's reckoning. Part 2. The night that changed everything. Marcus Thompson sat alone in the holding cell at Rampart Division, the harsh fluorescent light humming above him, and the past came alive again with a force he had not felt in years. 15 years earlier. He had been 30 years old, a dedicated law student driving his old Honda Civic home from a late-night study session at the library. His mind filled with dreams of one day standing in a courtroom to defend the vulnerable. Blue and red lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror on a quiet stretch near Lakeview Terrace. He pulled over calmly, hands on the wheel, polite as always. Detective John Ramirez and his partner from the elite crash anti-gang unit approached, flashlights blinding, voices already thick with accusation. "Step out of the vehicle," Ramirez ordered. No explanation given. The stop was never about a traffic violation. It was racial profiling, plain and brutal. Within seconds, they yanked Marcus from the car, slammed him against the hood, then threw him to the pavement. Boots crashed into his ribs. Batons struck his back and head with sickening force. 5 ribs fractured, spleen ruptured, face battered until he barely recognized himself in the hospital mirror days later. Blood filled his mouth. Pain exploded with every breath. And the deepest wound was the humiliation. A good man, an honor student, reduced to nothing because of the color of his skin, while the officers shouted slurs that echoed in his soul long after the physical bruises faded. As he lay curled on the asphalt, gasping, certain he would die. A passing driver captured the entire assault on a handheld video camera. That grainy footage, later broadcast across the nation, saved his life, forced an internal review, and eventually brought a civil settlement of $2.4 million from the city. Yet no amount of money erased the trauma, the nightmares, the constant fear whenever blue lights appeared behind him, in the quiet of the cell. Marcus breathed slowly, letting the memory wash over him without drowning him. That night had nearly destroyed him, but it also forged him. His mother, a lifelong civil rights advocate who had marched in the 60s, refused to let despair win. She sat by his hospital bed every day, holding his swollen hand, her voice firm yet tender. They tried to break your body, son, but they cannot break your spirit unless you allow it. Get up. Go deeper into the law. Become the judge who ensures this never happens to another child. Those words became his lifeline. He returned to school on pain medication and sheer will, graduated near the top of his class, clerked for a respected federal judge, then spent years as a prosecutor targeting public corruption. Step by step, he earned the appointment to the federal bench. Along the way, he married a kind woman who understood his scars, and together, they welcomed Sarah, now 14, the light of his life. He taught her early that justice was not automatic. It was a promise that good people had to fight to keep. John Ramirez, on the other hand, had chosen a darker path after that fateful night. The video evidence forced a brief investigation, but the code of silence protected him. His partner took early retirement. Ramirez received a slap on the wrist and a transfer. The Rampart scandal erupted soon after. Crash officers exposed for stealing drugs, planting evidence, framing innocents, even covering up shootings, and the unit was disbanded amid national outrage. Over 100 convictions were overturned. The city paid tens of millions in settlements, and federal oversight descended on the department for years. Ramirez survived the purge by keeping his head down, testifying minimally, and convincing himself the past was buried. Promotions came anyway. He told himself he was a good cop cleaning the streets. But guilt festered. Nights grew longer, filled with whiskey to quiet the memories of that young man bleeding on the pavement. His wife noticed the drinking first, then the anger, then the distance. Debts piled up from bad bets at the track, from habits he could not admit. Covering small crimes became routine again. A planted bag here, an altered report there, all justified as necessary to maintain order in a city still healing from riots and scandal. He had a family to support, he reasoned. Yet deep down, he knew the truth. He was running from the man he had become that night 15 years ago, now, in the present. The holding cell door stood as a temporary barrier. Marcus thought of Sarah waiting at home, probably worried because he had not called. She had sent a text earlier. "Dad, you promised we'd watch that movie tonight." He had replied with a quick, "On my way, sweetheart," never imagining he would spend the night behind bars. The thought hurt more than the fresh scrape on his cheek. Across the bullpen, Ramirez completed his falsified report and leaned back, satisfied the arrest would stick. Yet the prisoner's steady gaze lingered in his mind. "I know a great deal about you," the man had said. The words gnawed at him. He reached for his phone and dialed home. His wife answered softly, already resigned. "John, the kids are asleep. Another late night?" He mumbled about paperwork and a big collar. She paused, then whispered, "You missed our son's game again, and I found another empty bottle." Silence stretched heavy between them. He promised change, knowing the promise was hollow. He hung up, opened his locker, and pulled out the flask, one swallow to steady the nerves. Sergeant Elena Brooks observed from her desk. She had joined the force after Rampart, believing in the mission to protect and serve. Raising a child alone made loyalty to partners feel essential, Someone had to have your back. Yet tonight the arrest replayed in her mind, the drugs appearing too perfectly, the suspect too composed. She glanced at the evidence envelope, then at Ramirez turning away to hide his drink. A small crack formed in her certainty. In the Internal Affairs office down the hall, Lisa Wong stared at the glowing federal alert. A United States District Judge in custody on planted charges. She knew the docket intimately. Judge Marcus Thompson was set to preside over the largest Los Angeles Police Department corruption trial in a decade. The one targeting officers with histories exactly like Ramirez. Wong dialed the secure line to Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Carter. "We have a serious situation," she said, voice low, "and it just handed us everything we need." Marcus rested his head against the cool concrete wall. He whispered a quiet prayer. Not for revenge, but for the strength to do what was right. The young man who had lain bleeding and broken 15 years ago had become the judge who would now weigh the evidence. Monday morning was only hours away. The courtroom stood ready. This time. The scales would tip toward truth. Ramirez stepped outside for fresh air, flask hidden in his coat. The city lights blurred slightly. An old unease stirred, the same shadow that had followed him since that videotaped night. He pushed it down, lit a cigarette, and told himself everything would be fine. He could not see the federal machinery already in motion, the evidence logs being secured, the quiet calls placing his life under a microscope. The man he had tried to destroy twice now held his future in calm, steady hands. The station carried on through the night. Reports filed. Lights dimmed in empty offices. Truth, patient and unyielding, waited for dawn. The heavy steel door of the processing room at Rampart Division clanged shut behind Marcus Thompson as officers led him inside, the sound echoing like a final judgment in the empty corridor. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving, while the smell of disinfectant mixed with old coffee hung in the air. Marcus stood tall despite the cuffs, his scraped cheek still stinging. Blood dried in a thin line. The booking officer, a weary veteran named Martinez, motioned him forward for fingerprints. Marcus placed his hands on the digital scanner without resistance. Each press of his thumb and fingers sent data racing through secure federal networks. Within seconds, a priority alert flashed on screens far beyond the station walls. Federal judicial officer in custody. Immediate notification required. Yet here, in the dim processing room, no one noticed the red flag at first. Detective John Ramirez stood nearby, arms crossed, satisfaction on his face. He believed the planted drugs and false report would hold, just as so many had before. Sergeant Elena Brooks handled the evidence bag, logging the small plastic packet of white powder with routine efficiency. But her hand paused for a fraction of a second. Something about the timing of the discovery gnawed at her. Ramirez took Marcus to an interrogation room, small and bare. A metal table bolted to the floor. He sat across from him, leaning forward with practiced intimidation. "Let's make this easy," Ramirez said, voice low and commanding. "Admit the drugs are yours. Sign the statement. I'll talk to the district attorney about a lighter charge." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "Those drugs were not mine. You placed them there. I recorded the entire arrest." Ramirez laughed, but the sound lacked confidence. "Phone recordings without consent? Not admissible. Besides, who's going to believe a suspect over a decorated detective?" Marcus leaned in slightly. "A federal judge, perhaps. One who knows your history. 85 excessive force complaints, gambling debts to bookmakers, monthly cash deposits that don't match your salary." The color drained from Ramirez's face. He had buried those details deep, or so he thought. "How do you know that?" he demanded. Marcus offered only silence, letting the question hang. Brooks entered with a clipboard, observing the exchange. She had partnered with Ramirez for years, covering small indiscretions to protect the team. As a single mother, she valued stability, the overtime, the pension, the sense of family among officers. Yet tonight felt different. The suspect's composure, his precise knowledge, unsettled her. She glanced at the body cam footage downloading at the desk outside. The search had been too quick, too clean. In the Internal Affairs office down the hall, Detective Lisa Wong worked late, reviewing old Rampart files for the upcoming trial. The federal alert popped up on her monitor like a flare in the dark. She read the name twice. Honorable Marcus A. Thompson, United States District Judge. Her pulse quickened. This was the same judge assigned to preside over the corruption case starting Monday. The case targeting officers with patterns exactly like Ramirez. Wong picked up her secure phone and dialed Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Carter at home. Vanessa. It's Lisa. We have a major situation. Judge Thompson is in custody at Rampart on drug charges. It looks fabricated. Carter's voice sharpened instantly. Secure all evidence. Notify the marshals. Do not let local command touch this until federal authority arrives. Wong hung up and immediately contacted Officer Kayla Reyes, a young patrol officer she trusted. Kayla. Get to the evidence locker quietly. Photograph everything related to tonight's arrest. Chain of custody must be airtight. Back in the interrogation room. Ramirez grew agitated. He stood, pacing. You think you're smart? But Monday morning you'll face a real judge, and those drugs will put you away. Marcus remained seated, voice calm. I am the real judge, detective, and Monday morning you will face me. The words landed like a blow. Ramirez stopped pacing. Recognition flickered, then denial. You're lying. Marcus simply held his gaze, letting 15 years of waiting speak for itself. Brooks returned with coffee she did not drink. She watched Ramirez's hands tremble slightly as he gripped the table edge. Memories of her own son's questions. Why is Daddy's job so hard? Mom? Surfaced unbidden. Loyalty had always felt like protection. Tonight it felt like complicity. Martinez called from processing. Detective. The system's asking for supervisor override on the prints. Ramirez waved it off impatiently. Handle it later. But the override triggered another alert. This one reaching the U.S. Marshals Service duty desk in downtown Los Angeles. Within minutes. A team mobilized. Marcus sat back, wrists sore from the cuffs now removed for booking photos. He thought again of Sarah, asleep by now, trusting he would be home soon. The delay hurt, but he drew strength from her faith in him. He had survived worse than one night in a cell. Ramirez stepped out for air, flask burning in his pocket. He told himself the prisoner was bluffing, yet doubt crept in like smoke. He texted his wife. Rough night? Home soon? No reply came. Wong and Reyes worked quietly. Reyes photographed the evidence bag, noting the lack of pocket lint or wear. Clear signs of recent placement. Wong sealed digital copies of the body cam files before anyone could edit them. Vanessa Carter coordinated from home, waking senior Department of Justice officials. This arrest ties directly to our case. We move at dawn. Brooks lingered outside the cell. Watching Marcus through the small window, he sat upright, eyes closed, peaceful. She wondered what kind of man could remain so composed after such treatment. Ramirez returned, face hardened. Enjoy your stay, he said through the bars. Tomorrow changes nothing. Marcus opened his eyes. Tomorrow changes everything. The station settled into the quiet rhythm of the graveyard shift. Phones rang softly, keyboards clicked. Evidence lockers remained sealed under new eyes. Marcus whispered to himself. Hold on just a little longer. Dawn was near. Federal authority approached. The long night was ending. Ramirez sat at his desk, staring at the arrest report. For the first time in years, Fear outweighed arrogance, truth, gathering strength in the shadows, prepared to step into the light. The first pale light of Sunday morning crept across the Los Angeles skyline as black unmarked SUVs bearing U.S. Marshals. Service plates pulled silently into the parking lot of Rampart Division. Their arrival coordinated and swift. Inside the station, Detective John Ramirez nursed a cup of stale coffee at his desk, exhausted but convinced his arrest would stand as another routine collar in a long career. He had no warning when the front doors opened and federal agents in plain suits entered with quiet authority. Badges displayed, voices calm but firm. "We're here for the immediate release of Judge Marcus Thompson," the lead marshal announced to the duty sergeant. "Federal Judicial Protection Protocol. All evidence related to his detention is now under U.S. Attorney custody." Ramirez overheard the words from across the room and felt the floor shift beneath him. He stepped forward, voice rising in protest. "That suspect had drugs on him. We followed procedure." The marshal turned, expression unyielding. "The drugs bear only your fingerprints. Detective, Judge Thompson's recording and body cam footage tell a different story." Ramirez's face went ashen. The planted evidence, meant to bury a man, had become the chain that would bind him in the holding area. Marcus Thompson stood as the cell door opened. A marshal removed the last restraints and handed back his personal belongings: wallet, keys, phone, the torn suit jacket now folded neatly. Marcus met the agent's eyes with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for coming so quickly." No anger colored his voice, only relief tempered by resolve. He stepped into the corridor and saw Ramirez standing frozen near the processing desk, disbelief turning to panic. For a moment their gazes locked, 15 years of history compressed into seconds. Marcus offered no words, only a steady look that spoke of patience finally rewarded. Ramirez turned away first, hands trembling as he realized the man he had once left bleeding on a roadside was now the one who held the scales of justice. Sergeant Elena Brooks watched the scene unfold from the evidence counter. She had spent the night wrestling with doubt, replaying the arrest in her mind. When Kayla Reyes quietly showed her the photographs of the pristine drug bag, no lint, no wear, she felt the ground give way. Loyalty to the badge had sustained her through hard years as a single mother, but this crossed a line she could no longer ignore. She approached Lisa Wong as federal agents sealed files. "I'll cooperate," she said softly. "Whatever you need." Wong nodded, understanding the courage it took. Brooks thought of her own son asleep at home, and for the first time she prayed he would grow up in a department better than the one she had known. Marcus walked out into the cool morning air. Reporters had already gathered, alerted by overnight leaks. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. He paused at the steps, raised a hand gently, and spoke with measured calm. "I was wrongfully detained last night. The charges were without foundation. I trust the system to investigate thoroughly. Justice requires patience from all of us." He offered nothing more, stepping into a waiting federal vehicle. As it pulled away, he finally allowed himself a deep breath. His phone buzzed. Sarah. "Dad, are you okay? It's on the news." His voice trembled slightly when he answered. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm coming home now. We'll talk over breakfast." Hearing her relief brought the first tear to his eye in years. He wiped it away quickly, then closed his eyes and gave silent thanks for another dawn. Back inside, Ramirez faced the unraveling. Vanessa Carter arrived with Department of Justice investigators, presenting him with a retention letter, suspension pending investigation. "Your body cam, the recording from Judge Thompson's phone, the evidence discrepancies, all preserved and secured," she stated. "Obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, planting evidence. The U.S. Attorney's Office will review charges." Ramirez tried to speak, but words failed. His career, built on control and intimidation, collapsed in hours. He was escorted to an office to surrender his badge and weapon. The weight of the gun in its holster felt heavier than ever. When the door closed behind him, he sat alone, staring at the empty desk, and for the first time in decades he felt small. Lisa Wong and Kayla Reyes worked through the morning, cataloging digital files before local command could interfere. Wong felt the familiar mix of anger and hope that came with exposing corruption. Reyes, young and still idealistic, asked quietly, "Will this finally change things?" Wong answered honestly, "It will change some things, and we keep pushing for the rest, at home." Marcus embraced Sarah tightly. She had seen the reports, heard the word arrest, and feared the worst. He held her longer than usual, then sat her down at the kitchen table. "There are still people who judge others by appearance, not character," he said gently. "But there are also people working every day to make it right. Last night showed both." Sarah nodded, eyes wide but trusting. "You're going to be okay." "Dad?" He smiled, the first genuine smile since the park. "We're going to be okay." Ramirez drove home in silence, badge box on the passenger seat like a coffin. His wife met him at the door, face drawn from a sleepless night watching the news. "Is it true? John? Did you arrest a federal judge?" He tried to explain, mistake, bad luck. But she saw the fear in his eyes. "You promised after Rampart this part of your life was over." Their children watched from the hallway, confused and scared. The argument that followed was quiet but final. She asked him to leave for the night. He sat in his car outside the house he had provided for years. Flask empty, future uncertain. Federal investigators expanded the probe overnight. The arrest became the key that unlocked sealed files, over 140 old cases tied to Ramirez now flagged for review. Convictions built on planted evidence teetered. Victims long silenced found new voice. Marcus showered, changed, and sat in his study reviewing Monday's docket. The corruption trial remained on schedule. He would preside, as assigned, no recusal. The law demanded impartiality, and he would deliver it, not out of vengeance, but out of duty. As Sunday's sun climbed higher, the city stirred, news alerts spread, community leaders called for calm, Department of Justice statements promised thorough investigation. Ramirez stared at his reflection in a motel mirror, seeing a man he no longer recognized. Marcus closed the case files, stood, and looked out his window toward the hills. Dawn had broken. Truth had emerged. The long night was over, but the work of justice was just beginning. Monday morning arrived gray and cool over downtown Los Angeles. The federal courthouse at Edward R. Roybal stirring with unusual tension as reporters, spectators, and community advocates filled the marble halls long before the docket called, their murmurs echoing off high ceilings like distant thunder. Detective John Ramirez arrived early in his dress uniform, tie straightened with nervous precision, badge polished to deflect scrutiny, believing firmly he was there only as a prosecution witness in the long-awaited Los Angeles Police Department corruption trial that had consumed investigators for years. He had spent Sunday isolated in a cheap motel room, alternating between denial, anger, and heavy drinking. Convincing himself the wrongful arrest of the suspect in Griffith Park would be dismissed as federal overreach, that his years of testimony experience would still carry weight with the judge, whomever that might be. Sergeant Elena Brooks sat beside him in the gallery, her own future hanging by a thread after quietly agreeing late Sunday to full cooperation with federal investigators in exchange for consideration. Ramirez leaned close and whispered, "Stick to the script we always use. We followed procedure. Nothing ties back to the old cases. It'll be fine." She nodded mechanically, but her eyes avoided his. The crack in her loyalty, born from seeing the pristine evidence photos and thinking of her young son, now widened into a chasm she could not bridge. The bailiff's voice rang out clear and firm across the packed courtroom. All rise. The United States District Court for the Central District of California is now in session. The Honorable Marcus A. Thompson presiding. God save the United States and this honorable court. The room stood as one. Ramirez rose automatically, decades of courtroom habit guiding him. He glanced toward the bench with casual expectation, ready to see some unfamiliar face, then froze in place. Marcus Thompson entered through the side door in flowing black judicial robes, composed and authoritative, the faint scar on his left temple barely visible under the bright overhead lights. The man Ramirez had cuffed and humiliated in the park Saturday night. The man he had left broken and bleeding on a roadside 15 years earlier, now sat elevated above them all, gavel resting in hand. Recognition crashed over Ramirez like a wave. His knees buckled. He collapsed heavily into his seat with a resounding thud that echoed through the sudden silence. Brooks grabbed his arm tightly. "John, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He could not speak. His face drained of color, breath coming in short, ragged gasps as the impossible reality settled over him like a shroud. Marcus adjusted his glasses slowly and opened the thick case file with deliberate calm. The sound of pages turning amplified in the hushed room. His voice carried steady, measured authority to every corner. United States versus Ramirez, Brooks, and others. Case number CR 25487. Counsel. Are all parties present and ready? Vanessa Carter rose for the government. Yes, Your Honor. The United States is ready. Defense attorneys mumbled their readiness. Voices strained. Marcus continued without pause. Very well. Before we proceed with opening statements, the court must address a matter of potential conflict that has arisen since Friday's final pretrial conference. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Marcus met the eyes of the courtroom unflinchingly. On Saturday evening, I was personally arrested in Griffith Park by Detective John Ramirez on charges of drug possession and identity fraud. I was detained overnight at Rampart Division, interrogated by Detective Ramirez and Sergeant Brooks, and released Sunday morning after federal intervention confirmed my identity and the fabricated nature of the charges. Gasps spread like waves through the room. Cameras clicked furiously until the bailiff sternly called for order. Ramirez stared straight ahead, world collapsing inward. His attorney scrambled to his feet, face flushed. Your Honor, we move for immediate recusal on grounds of undeniable bias and prejudice. Marcus looked directly at counsel, then let his gaze rest briefly on Ramirez. The motion is noted. Counsel, bias is alleged, but not yet established. The court will allow the evidence to speak for itself before ruling. He signaled the bailiff with quiet command. Prosecution may play Exhibit 47, continuous body cam footage from the arrest. Authenticated and sealed. The large courtroom screen illuminated. Crystal clear high-definition video showed Ramirez approaching Marcus on the quiet park bench. The aggressive questioning, the sleight of hand planting of the small drug bag, the unnecessary roughness as cuffs bit into wrists already scarred from old trauma. Marcus narrated in an even, factual tone. Note the timestamp carefully. At 9:37 p.m., Detective Ramirez places the evidence in my inner pocket. At 9:39 p.m., he announces its discovery during routine search. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as racial slurs and false accusations filled the speakers. Every word preserved. Next came Exhibit 48, sealed hospital records from 15 years ago, now unsealed for this proceeding. Emergency admission records filled the screen. Victim Marcus Thompson, age 30. 5 fractured ribs, ruptured spleen, extensive defensive wounds on arms and hands, Attending officer report listed Detective John Ramirez as first on scene, with glaring timeline discrepancies that no honest investigation could overlook. Marcus's voice remained even, almost gentle. Medical staff confirmed I was already in surgery when Detective Ramirez claimed to find me unconscious at the scene. Exhibit 49 followed immediately. The combined audio from Marcus's phone recording and the Sunday interrogation at Rampart, capturing Ramirez's growing panic, his denials crumbling under precise questions only the true victim would know to ask. Vanessa Carter rose again. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence directly tied to the pattern alleged in the indictment, the government moves to amend counts to include additional civil rights violations and obstruction stemming from this weekend's events. Marcus nodded once. Motion granted. The evidence is relevant, material, and admissible. Ramirez clutched his chest suddenly, sweat beading on his forehead, breaths shallow. His lawyer rose in haste. Your Honor, my client requires immediate medical attention. He appears to be in cardiac distress. Paramedics were summoned swiftly, as they wheeled Ramirez toward the doors on a stretcher. Oxygen mask in place. Marcus's voice followed, calm and resolute across the room. Court will recess until Detective Ramirez is medically cleared to return. We will resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Justice proceeds deliberately, but it proceeds. Brooks remained seated as the room emptied slowly, alone now with her thoughts and the weight of her choices. She had texted Lisa Wong that morning confirming full cooperation in exchange for leniency. The burden of years spent covering for partners lifted slightly, replaced by fear for her pension and her son's future, but also by a quiet, unexpected relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Community leaders called urgently for calm, mindful of the city's painful history with police trials. Marcus left through a secure judicial exit, declining all interviews with a polite but firm gesture, in his chambers. His longtime clerk, Margaret Hayes, waited, eyes red from worry and lack of sleep. Judge, are you truly all right? He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I am. Margaret. And we have important work ahead. Sarah texted from school between classes. Everyone's talking about it. I'm so proud of you. Dad. He replied with a simple red heart emoji, then set the phone down and exhaled. Ramirez, in the ambulance racing toward the hospital, stared at the ceiling as monitors beeped steadily, confirming severe panic attack rather than heart failure. He whispered hoarsely to himself, voice breaking. How did he survive back then? We checked the reports. The lie he had lived with for 15 years now stared back, unforgiving, and for the first time he felt its full weight. Marcus returned home that evening, physically exhausted but inwardly unbroken. He and Sarah ate a quiet dinner, then talked long into the night about fear, about forgiveness, and about the duty to stand firm when the system is tested. He told her gently, "Justice is not revenge, sweetheart. It is restoration, of trust, of fairness, of lives damaged." She hugged him tightly, holding on as if to anchor them both. The city held its breath through the evening news cycles. The trial would continue. Evidence would mount higher. Truth, once hidden for so long in shadows and sealed files, now stood fully revealed in open court. From the bench to the bench, a judge's reckoning. Part 6, Consequences and Reckoning. The weeks following the dramatic courtroom confrontation unfolded with the steady, inexorable force of federal justice. As the expanded indictment against Detective John Ramirez and his co-defendants moved forward under the watchful eye of the Department of Justice, Ramirez returned to court after his hospital evaluation confirmed severe panic rather than cardiac failure. But the man who took the stand bore little resemblance to the confident officer who had once wielded unchecked authority. Pale and subdued, he listened as former colleagues, including Sergeant Elena Brooks, testified against him in exchange for reduced charges. Brooks spoke clearly, voice steady despite the personal cost. I covered for patterns I knew were wrong because I thought loyalty to the badge meant silence. I was mistaken. Lives were damaged. Trust eroded. I am sorry for my part. Her words carried weight. She received 5 years of probation, permanent demotion, and a requirement to complete community restitution, teaching ethics classes to new recruits. For her, consequence meant loss of rank and reputation, but also the chance to rebuild with honesty, to show her son that admitting fault could be a form of strength. Ramirez faced the full measure. The jury deliberated only 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts: civil rights violations under color of law, conspiracy to obstruct justice, planting evidence, and perjury at sentencing. Marcus Thompson presided with the same measured calm he had shown throughout. Vanessa Carter presented victim impact statements from more than a dozen individuals whose cases had been tainted over the years, including several whose wrongful convictions were now overturned. When given the opportunity to speak, Ramirez stood, voice hoarse. I convinced myself I was keeping the streets safe. I was wrong. I caused harm I cannot undo. The apology rang hollow to many. But Marcus listened without visible reaction. He imposed a sentence of 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release, forfeiture of pension, and permanent bar from law enforcement, as deputies led Ramirez away. He glanced one last time toward the bench. Marcus met his eyes briefly, offering neither hatred nor forgiveness, only the impartial acknowledgement that justice had been served. The city of Los Angeles absorbed a substantial financial reckoning as well. Civil settlements for the 140 overturned or compromised cases totaled over $100 million, paid from public funds and insurance reserves. Community organizations received portions for restorative programs, new lighting and patrols in Griffith Park, scholarships for children of wrongfully convicted parents, expanded mental health services for trauma survivors. The Department of Justice extended federal oversight of the Los Angeles Police Department by 5 additional years, mandating enhanced body camera policies, mandatory de-escalation training, and independent audits of internal affairs investigations. Kayla Reyes, the young officer who had helped secure evidence that first night, was promoted to a training role, developing curriculum that emphasized constitutional rights and community trust. Lisa Wong received a commendation from the U.S. Attorney General for integrity under pressure, her work becoming a model for other divisions nationwide. Marcus refused most interview requests, but agreed to one closed community forum at a local church, standing before families who had waited years for accountability. He spoke quietly. This outcome does not erase the pain caused. It simply affirms that no one stands above the law. Not officers, not judges, not any of us. We honor victims best by continuing the work of reform, every single day. The audience rose in sustained applause, many with tears in their eyes. Margaret Hayes, his clerk, watched from the side, proud of the man she had served for years. Sarah noticed the change in her father most of all. The nightmares that once woke him in the night grew less frequent. He smiled more easily, spent evenings coaching her debate team, teaching her that courage often looks like calm persistence rather than loud confrontation. One night at dinner, she asked, "Dad, do you forgive him?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I release the hatred. Sweetheart, holding it only hurts me. Forgiveness is a longer journey, and it belongs to each person on their own terms." Ramirez began his sentence at a low-security federal facility hours north of the city, stripped of badge and authority. He shared meals with men whose lives he had once disrupted. Evenings found him alone in his cell, writing letters he rarely sent, one to his estranged wife, apologizing for the years lost to denial, another to his children, promising to become someone they could respect again. A prison counselor encouraged reflection, and slowly, painfully, Ramirez began to confront the choices that had led him there. He enrolled in courses on restorative justice, reading accounts from victims of police misconduct. The work was hard, the shame deep. But for the first time, he faced it without whiskey to numb the pain. Brooke started her community service at a youth center in South Los Angeles, mentoring teenagers interested in law enforcement. She spoke honestly about her mistakes, warning them that silence in the face of wrong is itself a choice with consequences. Some evenings, she sat with her son, answering his questions about why Mom no longer wore the uniform with pride. "I'm teaching him that real protection comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard," she told a colleague. The city healed in visible and quiet ways. Griffith Park installed brighter lights and community patrol programs funded by settlement money. Families picnicked without fear where shadows once lingered. New recruits at the academy watched training videos that included excerpts from the trial, learning early that the badge carries responsibility, not entitlement. Marcus continued on the bench, accepting new cases involving civil rights and public integrity. He mentored young attorneys, emphasizing that the law's power lies not in punishment alone, but in restoration of trust. Each evening he returned home to Sarah, grateful for ordinary moments, a shared meal, homework help, laughter over small things. Consequences had arrived, measured and fair. Some doors closed forever, others opened toward accountability and growth. The reckoning was complete. Yet the larger work of justice carried on, day by day, case by case, life by life, several months after the guilty verdicts and the sentencing. Marcus Thompson returned to Griffith Park on a quiet Tuesday evening, the same golden hour when everything had begun. The bench where he had once been cuffed and humiliated now sat beneath new, brighter lights funded by the settlement money. Children laughed on a freshly built playground nearby, their voices carrying across grass that had finally been reclaimed from fear. Marcus wore simple jeans and a light jacket, no robe, no badge of office, just a father and a citizen walking the paths he once avoided after dark. Sarah walked beside him, 14 going on 20, her hand occasionally brushing his arm as if to remind them both that they were safe. They stopped at the same wooden bench. Marcus sat slowly, letting the memories come without resistance. The scar on his temple no longer throbbed. It simply was. A quiet reminder rather than an open wound. A young officer in a crisp uniform approached cautiously from the walking trail. Officer Daniel Torres, barely 2 years on the job, removed his cap and spoke with respect. "Your Honor, Judge Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you. The Academy changed everything because of what happened. They show us the body cam clips now, not to shame anyone, but to teach us what never to become. De-escalation, constitutional rights, community trust. It's mandatory every year." Marcus looked up and smiled. Genuine and warm. "Thank you for telling me that, Officer Torres. And thank you for choosing to wear the uniform the right way." Torres hesitated, then added softly, "My dad was a cop during the old days. He retired rather than change, said it wasn't policing anymore. I think he was wrong." Marcus nodded. "Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting the job has to grow up. You're proof it can." The young man replaced his cap, stood taller, and walked on with purpose. An elderly man with a small grandson on his shoulders approached next. He stopped, eyes widening in recognition. "You're the judge from the news." Marcus stood politely. "I am." The man's voice trembled with gratitude. "My boy was stopped 2 years ago. Same kind of planted evidence. Lost his scholarship. Almost lost hope. After your case. They reopened his file. Charges dropped. He starts community college next semester. You gave him his future back." Marcus placed a gentle hand on the child's sneaker. Tell your grandson the system belongs to him too. It's only broken when good people stop believing it can be fixed. The man wiped his eyes and walked on, repeating the words under his breath like a prayer. Sarah squeezed her father's hand. Dad, look how different it is now. New cameras, community volunteers in bright vests, families staying long after sunset. The park had become what it was always meant to be, a public space for everyone. Marcus felt something settle deep inside, a peace he had not known he was still missing. Not triumph, not vengeance, simple, quiet healing. Later. As the sky deepened to indigo, Marcus's phone buzzed. Vanessa Carter calling. Judge. The Department of Justice just closed the expanded Rampart oversight file. 142 cases fully vacated. Settlements paid. Reforms locked in for another decade. They're calling it the Thompson Reforms nationwide. You did this. Marcus watched a group of teenagers playing basketball under the new lights. No. He answered softly. We all did this. Officers like Torres and Reyes. Witnesses like Brooks who chose truth. Families who never stopped speaking. I just held the gavel for a moment. Carter laughed quietly. Keep that humility. The next case is already on your docket. Another civil rights pattern. The work doesn't end. Marcus smiled. Good. Schedule the hearing. They walked toward the parking lot as stars appeared overhead. The same stars that had watched him bleed years ago, now shining on children playing without fear. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to be scared to come here at night. Now it feels normal. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Normal is what we fought for. Sweetheart. Normal. Safe. And fair. For everybody. In a federal prison up north. John Ramirez finished his evening meal and returned to his cell. He had begun writing a letter he might finally send. One to the support group for families of wrongfully convicted persons, offering to speak when eligible for programs, to tell new officers what the inside of regret really looks like. The shame still burned, but it no longer consumed him. He had started the long, slow journey toward whatever redemption was possible. Elena Brooks finished her last ethics class of the week, watching recruits take notes as she spoke plainly about the cost of silence. Kayla Reyes led the next session on body camera integrity, her voice confident, her eyes bright with purpose. Lisa Wong accepted an award in Washington, then immediately returned to Los Angeles because the work was here. Marcus and Sarah reached the car. He paused, looking back at the park one last time. The playground lights glowed warm against the evening sky. Laughter carried on the breeze. He thought of his mother, long past, who had told him on that hospital bed to change the system from within. He whispered into the night, We're still trying. Mama, we're still trying. They drove home through streets now patrolled by officers who understood that protect and serve meant every neighborhood, every face, every story. The gavel rested quietly on Marcus's desk at the courthouse, waiting for tomorrow's cases. Some scars had become sources of strength. Some nights had become new dawns. And justice, slow, imperfect, but unbroken, continued its patient, necessary work, full circle, not the end, but a stronger beginning. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. It truly means a lot, if it touched you. Please like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more. See you next time.